It's an honor. When I was talking to Alana about the Google culture, it kept thinking that this is just like mountaineers. You know, you wake up in the middle of the night with some harebrained idea, you know, that only you should be excited about, and then you go back to work and you start to share this idea with a couple of other people. They get excited, and before you know it, you've launched an expedition. And we've all been on these crazy adventures, and just like launching a product at Google or launching an expedition, it's not really until you start to take 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 steps down the way that you realize you have to iterate. You have to, you know, adjust your plan to try to reach your ultimate goal. And if you're successful, you get to the summit. But we all know that we don't get to the summit every single time. I've led 145 international mountaineering expeditions. I've been on Everest as one example 3 different times, guiding the North Ridge. And you know, sometimes we get to the top and sometimes we don't. And one thing that I've learned along the way is that you know, generally the most dangerous thing that we face on these peaks are the people that we're climbing with. And in mountaineering, you know, they look at all the reasons why people die, and it's not till the 5th reason that we find out that it was Mother Nature. Prior to that, the top 4 reasons that people die is because of human error. So if we could kind of figure out a way to engineer some of these errors out of there, then we might be able to get to the top on a more regular basis. The first, well, as I said, I have climbed Mount Everest. I got to the summit in 2001. When I got to the top, I had expected, you know, as a mountaineer, maybe a little bit, you know, kind of naive or, you know, at least expectant that I would get to the top and that, you know, some angels would sing and I would suddenly have some kind of information that would make me special. And when I got to the summit of Everest, it was the record summit day on that peak. 89 people reached the top that day. So instead of angels, I heard people, you know, clicking cameras and, you know, holding up banners and, you know, shouting out all this kind of heroic stuff. And it really kind of bummed me out. I said, you know, why did it, you know, if Everest is the greatest peak in mountaineering, then how come it doesn't feel like that to me? And as I came down off that mountain, I started to think, well, there's got to be some place out there where I will hear the angels sing, where I'll be able to get to the top and I'll really learn a tremendous amount about myself and about, you know, teaming and about my role in mountaineering. And I started to think that I needed a challenge that was a lot greater than Everest. And for most mountaineers, the bigger challenge is K2. So K2 is the 2nd highest peak in the world. Has anyone here ever climbed K2? I doubted it. Has anyone here ever climbed Everest? So you know that there's been 4,000 people have stood on the summit of Mount Everest. That's quite a bit. In fact, in 2001, the year I summited, somebody on that summit day was the 2,000th person to get to the top. In May of 2007, 540 people stood on the summit of Mount Everest. In 1 month, 540 people. On K2, in the history of K2, up through 2007, only 253 people reached the summit of the mountain. So it's dramatically different. But you know, in climbing, we have a statistic, I think, that kind of points out the difference even greater. We have the death to summit ratio. And on Everest, there's been 208 deaths and roughly 4,000 summits. So the ratio is 1.8% death to summits. Do you guys have that in baseball or soccer? On K2, up through 2007, the death to summit ratio was 23.8%, right? So dramatically different peak than Mount Everest. In fact, of the people who reached the top of K2, 1 in 7 of the summiters will actually die on the way back down. So it is a horribly difficult peak. It's extremely dangerous. And you would think that if you're going to go climb there, that the best way to get yourself to the top and more importantly to come back down was to team up with the best of the best, right? So if you're with the A team, you know, the all-stars, this is going to be the way to get to the summit. And that's what I thought. So when I was given a phone call by this guy, Henry Todd, in 2002, and he said, hey, Chris, I'm putting together an expedition with 12 of the best mountaineers in the world. Will you join us? I jumped at the chance. I thought, you know, here it was. If I was ever going to have a team that was going to, you know, make me better, it was going to be this team. It was the worst team I've ever been on. In fact, we couldn't have organized a picnic, never mind a summit attempt. And Henry Todd, who is our leader, he's a great guy. He's actually very colorful, and he was quite entrepreneurial. Back in the 60s, he was the largest distributor of LSD in Europe, right? So we wouldn't have things like Pink Floyd without this guy. So anyway, Henry did spend 7 years in jail, and when he got out of jail, he decided, I never want to sleep indoors again. So he moved to Nepal, and he started running these expeditions. So as I said, he put together 12 people to go climb K2. I was honored to be on that team. We didn't get anywhere that year. In fact, nobody summited K2 in 2002. The weather really was that bad. The expedition ended for me on my birthday when I saw this man fall 5,000 feet down off the side of the mountain. Every time his body hit the slopes, he literally exploded red. And when you just see these big splash of scarlet on the snow, and then he would bounce out again. And he landed 500 feet away from us. Everybody was so gripped that only two of us would leave from where we were, climb out to where his body was. When we got to him, his legs were wrapped underneath him in a way that he shouldn't have been. The whole back of his skull was completely collapsed. His eyes were in the wrong place, his nose, the whole thing. And two of us had to wrap him up. We had to hide his body in such a way that nobody would see it, because to tell you the truth, it was so shocking, the sight of him. And when we reached underneath his torso to lift him up, I became completely drenched in his blood. We were able to wrap him inside one tent, and he still bled through the tent. We wrapped him in another tent. He bled through that. We finally got a gigantic plastic garbage bag, wrapped it around him, and that was the only thing that kept the blood from seeping back out. And then we lowered him down to where everybody else was waiting. And we got down there, I felt like I could hand his body off, and the second I did that, the stress hit me. I felt like I was being stabbed with 37 or 100 knives in my gut, and I literally bent over and started sobbing, crying. And it's my birthday, and I want to go home. And so I packed up all my stuff, and I headed back to the United States. When you die on K2, they take the plate that you have been eating off of for the last 2 months, and they, of course, scrape the food off it. And then they take a hammer and a nail, and they'll etch your name into these plates. So this is the plate from Captain Nick Ball, who we saw fall 5,000 feet to his death. There's 63 plates that are strapped to this pile of rocks called the Gilkey Memorial to memorialize the 63 people who had died up to the point when this picture was taken. Right? So this mountain is extremely deadly. It's very rare that we're able to get to your body to take it back down. In 2003, of all the teams who went to K2, nobody summited. In 2004, there was a bunch of teams that went to K2. Some teams summited, 2 people died. 2005, I returned to K2. This time I was going to do it completely different. Instead of going with the best of the best team, I was going to go with just one trusted friend. We reached 25,000 feet on 2 different occasions. Both times we were stopped by gigantic snowstorms. Eventually we had to walk off the mountain completely exhausted. I had lost over 35 pounds. The day that this picture was taken, I started to pee blood. It's a long walk. As you walk out, it takes about 4 or 5 days to get back to the trailhead. So just days of just somber marching. And, you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself because you failed. You're peeing blood. You're just like, you think you've given it all. And every step I took, I kept telling myself, I'm going to come back someday, right? So the first time I went with a team of 12 of the best, right? We didn't get to the summit. In fact, of those 12 people, 6 of them have since died. So it's been a rough run for that gang. I went back in 2005. We didn't summit. In fact, in 2005, nobody summited. In 2006, 4 people got to the top. 6 people died. Right? So it's been a horrible couple of years. I decided in 2007 I was going to go back again, and this time I wanted to put even more emphasis on who I was going to climb with. In the first time, we hired everybody on our team based on resumes, and it didn't work out at all, right? The second time, I had the guy who had, who I knew on a behavioral level was going to be the perfect partner, but we never got the shot because of the weather. And then this year, I wanted to do the same thing. Hire people based upon proven track record of behavior, not based on their resumes. So I got a hold of a guy named Don Bowie, who actually lives in California in Bishop. And Don had never summited an 8,000-meter peak, but he is a mountain rescue guy, and he has an impeccable reputation in the sport. And then we got a hold of a guy named Bruce Normand, who's also had never summited an 8,000-meter peak, but he is very famous for doing this exploratory mountaineering, and I've known him for about a dozen years. So it seemed like we had a really good team. It seemed like, if nothing else, that we could come together and agree on a couple of goals. And our first goal was everybody had to get home alive. Right? Our second goal was that we all wanted to summit, and our third goal is we wanted to do it in a style that represented who we were as people, that really showed off the best of what we believe mountaineering to be. So we went off to the mountain. We got there on June 1st. At K2 as being K2, sending down these gigantic avalanches. We placed base camp on this glacier here at 17,200 feet. From there, we have to march up the glacier through the ice falls to access this side of K2. On the second day of the expedition, we almost die the first time, Bruce and I are tied together by a rope. We're passing through this gigantic ice fall, and as he's walking across a snow bridge, he's walking across what seems like a completely flat section of snow. Suddenly, the floor gives out on him, and he goes shooting 25 feet down into this hole, this gigantic crevasse. Now, crevasse could be 250 feet to 500 feet deep, and he's rocketing down in there. He's tied to me by a rope. Suddenly, that rope comes tight, and I'm in a tug-of-war. I know I'm going to lose. And I'm being dragged towards the lip of this crevasse. The two of us are going to be, rocket down to the bottom. We'll just be entombed in ice. Within an hour or two, we will die, and they will never be able to find our bodies. And as I'm sliding across, knowing I'm going to die, suddenly the ground underneath me explodes open, and I fall in a separate crevasse. And Bruce is 25 feet down in one hole, and I'm 5 feet down in the other, right? So it was a pure miracle, right? It was just... I'm still blown away by that. In fact, looking at the history of mountaineering, never before have two people fallen into two different crevasses at exactly the same time, right? Normally, you both fall in the same crevasse, and as I said, they just put take your dinner plate and type your name into it and hang it on the rock. Well, we started up the mountain, and we made actually 4 different attempts through June and into July, and each time we would be stopped by the horrendous snowstorms that are typical in this part of the world. We would climb in the snowstorms quite often because we knew we had to force our way up. We had to get 500 pounds of equipment into place, tents and sleeping bags and stoves and ropes and all sorts of other stuff. We had to establish the camps. We had all this work to do. It's just pure labor when you're on a mountaineering expedition. Somebody comes up with a great idea. It sounds like a lot of fun at home, and then you get there and you find out it's nothing but brutally difficult work.